Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, I am really honored to have Dr. Stephen Porges back on the podcast. And today, he's joining us with his son, Seth. So Stephen W. Porges, Ph.D., is a distinguished university scientist at Indiana University, where he is the founding director of the Traumatic Stress Research Consortium. He is a professor of psychiatry at the University of North Carolina and professor emeritus at both the University of Illinois at Chicago and the University of Maryland. He lives in Atlantic Beach, Florida. Seth Porges is a journalist and filmmaker. He directed the critically acclaimed documentary Class Action Park, HBO Max. He lives in Atlantic Beach, Florida, and Brooklyn, New York. How safe we feel is crucial to our physical and mental health and happiness. That is the essence of polyvagal theory, first proposed in 1994 by psychologist and neuroscientist Stephen Porges. And in their new book, Our Polyvagal World, How Safety and Trauma Change Us, Stephen Porges and his son Seth Porges give general readers an accessible guide to polyvagal theory and how this can help anyone looking to live their healthiest and happiest lives. So today we're going to be discussing their new book, which was released this week, just a few days ago. So first I want to welcome you back, Stephen, and welcome Seth on the show.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So this book, Our Polyvagal World, How Safety and Trauma Changed Us. It was such a great book. I just read it, and it is so accessible to anybody because you don't really have to have any prior knowledge of what polyvagal theory is or any kind of medical knowledge. You can just pick up this book and read it and get a really good understanding of how this polyvagal nerve is impacting your life and everything that you really do and all the things that you have experienced in life and why it may be that you're reacting certain ways in certain situations. So my first question to you both is, now you co-wrote this book, and what inspired you to collaborate and write this book together?
Well, I'll take this, Dad. This is Seth, the son here. No, I mean, it was really wonderful being able to have this experience and share it with my father, with Dr. Porges. And I mean, I'll just take the credit for having the idea to do it. I'll just do that right now. But it really came from, I think, a realization that I was having, and I think the other people had, that this was really important information that has the ability to help a lot of people, but there just simply wasn't much out there in a format that the average person could understand. There are books about polyvagal theory, including ones Dr. Porges himself has written, that are rather opaque, academic, or aimed at clinicians. And the idea was, how do we take these principles and go straight to the person, straight to the real person out there who's just trying to understand, why do I feel the way I do? Why am I stressed? Why am I unhealthy? Why is my brain not working the way it used to? Why am I going through this world and experiencing these things that seem to have no explanation, but are dominating my reality, my existence? And, I kind of learned a lot about polyvagal theory, I guess, through osmosis, dinner table conversations and whatnot, and just being around my father. And I don't think really until I sat down to start writing this with him did I realize how not only how well I think I understood a lot of his ideas, but how fluently I was able to say them in ways that felt like it was his voice. And I think he'll be the first to say that it's a really blurred line between who wrote what in this book, and I think that's really fun.
That's a great answer. A great answer. Go ahead, Stephen.
I'll kind of support this. I think as a scientist and an academic, as Seth used the word opaque, I mean, we're trained to write that way. This is how we function. But it led in my life to great frustrations because I wanted to communicate, get these words out. And fortunately, I couldn't say, Seth, please write a book with me. You don't do that with your son. But Seth, saw the opportunity And it was his idea, because I was not going to impose something on him, because he's a creative individual. The interesting part is really how he captured the voice. And it's not just the information. When I read through the drafts, I'm hearing my voice and I'm saying, where did this come from? It's remarkable. And it is my voice, but it's not my dense voice. It's much more like my podcasting voice, where I'm talking to people. Seth got it. And I was just startled. Really, I will tell you, I've always known that my son was very bright, but I just couldn't, in a sense, comprehend his ability to deconstruct these really basically pretty dense constructs. And so you said in the introduction, like, you don't need a medical degree or a PhD to understand it. Well, I would say that many people with medical degrees and PhDs have difficulty in understanding the theory, because they don't carry with them the same history of learning and knowledge that went into building the theory, which basically crossed so many disciplines and is literally an example of a transdisciplinary journey that came up with some very basic principles of what it is to be a human being. Seth captured that. So I have the smile because I have the son who was able to give voice to the ideas.
Yeah, and I think the way I wanted to approach this book was that just by virtue of living in this modern world and everything that comes through it, that's sort of the advanced degree that will allow you to understand everything we wrote. The idea was to make things intuitive and recognizable to the shared experiences and the shared feelings and the shared emotional and bodily experiences that I think we all have just by virtue of living in 2023, right? And everything that comes with that. And I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed. A lot of people feel anxious.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people feel stressed out. And I think a lot of people feel that those feelings are mysterious. They have a hard time understanding what purpose they serve, where they're coming from, what they can do about them. And making people first off realize that I'm speaking directly to you and your experiences. I hope they're relatable. And I think they are. And from there, once people feel simply heard and understand, like, how, simply heard about what they feel like, I think there's an opportunity to really give people a sense of guidance and explanation, because there's nothing worse than dealing with these experiences through a fog of mystery, is the truth.
Let me you basically, Seth, you pulled some more ideas right out of my mind right there. I was listening to you. It's getting a little scary, but
Sorry
the
about
issue
that.
is,
Yeah.
over the years, what I've realized is the most important thing for a human is to be witnessed. What happens is that when things aren't going right, people go up and they try to fix it. And people want to be heard. They want their feelings to be respected and experienced and shared. They don't want to be told what to do. Polyvagal theory gives you that understanding that we as a species want to be heard. We want to be witnessed, and we don't do a very good job at witnessing each other. The second important point that you were talking about, Seth, is this notion of feelings. We live in a society that says feelings optional. Behavior obligatory, feelings optional. The issue is, what are feelings, and when do we feel safe? When do we feel under threat? The answer is really quite simple through the lens of the polyvagal theory. We can only feel safe when our autonomic nervous system can literally service our bodily needs, our homeostatic functions of health, growth, restoration, and included in that is sociality. So that when we feel safe, we are spontaneously social, we're exploratory, we play games, life is optimistic. But when we don't feel safe, everything around us is a cue of danger. And that is really saying that our nervous system is now trying to protect us from those dangers. And of course, when you deal with the world of trauma, you start seeing the impact of traumatic experience on health and social behavior. It just unfolds in front of your eyes whenever you witness someone who has experienced trauma.
That brings me to a question. So I'm going to try and connect some of the dots for our listener base, myself included, that have experienced a near-death experience, and people who experience a near-death experience. They're either dead or they're very close to death, typically. And so what comes along with that experience, to find yourself in that experience, is most likely some traumatic event of some sort. So on the International Association of Near-Death Studies, IANS, on their website, under physiological changes of an NDE, it says, and I quote, "Sensitivity to light and sound can be a serious issue and may necessitate some lifestyle changes. While most experiencers learn to limit sunshine exposure, others can't get enough. Almost everyone, though, has similar difficulties with loud or discordant sounds, and many can no longer tolerate hard rock music, and the vast majority prefer classical, melodic, and or natural sounds and become passionate about using music to heal." So, and then I looked in your book and I said, wow, that's what it led me to go back to Ian's website to look up the physiological, because I remembered it from reading your book. And it says on page 22, those middle ear muscles are also one reason why a large number of trauma survivors are hypersensitive to sound and suffer from auditory processing disorders that include difficulties understanding human voices in crowded and noisy environments such as shopping malls, restaurants, and parties. Now,
yes,
can you explain what most likely is going on for all these near-death experiences and others who have experienced trauma, and why it's difficult for them to tolerate loud sounds, after their experience?
While Dr. Porges here is the expert on this, I'm just going to jump in and Englishify this a little bit here. That's all right. So the essence of polyvagal theory, the essence of our autonomic nervous system in general, and that term, I'm amazed, I don't think we should take for granted that people understand what the term autonomic nervous system means. Autonomic nervous system is our automatic nervous system. It's all of our bodily functions, all of our bodily systems that operate without us consciously thinking about them. Your heart beats without you telling your heart to beat. Otherwise, you say in the book, couldn't go to sleep at night if you had to tell your heart to beat. It would be really exhausting if you had to make every sweat gland manually operate, right? Most of our body operates automatically. Consciousness and conscious will control a very small percentage of our functions. Now, the chief role of the autonomic nervous system, like most parts of our body, is to keep us alive, right? And in doing so, it shifts how virtually every bodily system, organ, function in our body operates based on what is most likely going to keep us alive at any moment. Whether we feel safe, whether our nervous system, that is, senses safety, or whether our nervous system senses danger. And the process through which our nervous system will either sense safety or danger is one that Dr. Porges has coined neuroception. Now, depending on how safe or danger your body's neuroception deems any situation to be, that could be an animal, it could be a person, it could be a noise, it could be anything at all, your body almost instantly shifts how virtually every process inside of it operates, so that if you are in danger, you're ready for it. We've all heard of the term fight or flight, of course. That's what's going on here. And I think when people think about fight or flight, they think about these narrow shifts, like your heart rate goes up, maybe your pain tolerance. I don't think people realize how thoroughly this shift changes everything in your body, down to, as we were talking about before, these tiny muscles in your ears, the littlest, smallest muscles in the entire body. And these muscles, their job is to filter the sounds of human speech, the sounds of sociability out of the air. If I'm at a party, I might actually be able to have a conversation, even if the music is loud. That's because these muscles serve as a filtering device. Well, their interaction with the eardrum serves as a filtering device. It allows you to pull these specific frequencies out of the air, even if there's a lot of music going on. However, these muscles, they shift depending on how safe you feel, depending on how threatened you feel. And when we feel threatened, these muscles shift. So instead of hearing the sounds of human speech, you're now in a position where their goal, being to keep us alive, primes them to pick up the sounds of threats, of predators. And whereas the sounds of human speech are kind of middle frequency melodic sounds, the sounds of threats, the sounds of predators, those are perhaps very low frequency, rumbling, growling sounds. Imagine a saber-toothed tiger in the bush, for example. And because your body feels like it is threatened, its alarm system, so to speak, is on right now, your hearing changes, your audiology profile changes. So instead of hearing the sounds of human speech, you're now hearing very low frequencies, and you're hyper tuned to them as well, because if something's going down, you want to be able to hear that instantly. And so people who have experienced near-death experiences or sort of any traumatic instance are very likely to walk away from that, where if they are always feeling threatened, which I think is one possible way of actually defining trauma, is the feeling of always being threatened. If they're always feeling threatened, well, their body is going to operate always as if it's in a state of threat. And with that comes a shifting in how we hear the world around us. So then instead of hearing the sounds of people talking that might be much harder to pick up, you're going to be hyper tuned to very low threatening frequencies. And likewise, your body is expecting threats. So those sounds are filtered through mechanisms that treat them as threats. So it's not just if you're at a party and say you're a veteran who's coming back and you're dealing with auditory issues. It's not just that it's loud, it's that the loudness makes you feel threatened. And that is the thing. It's not just annoying, it changes and reinforces the bodily condition of feeling under threat. And according to polyvagal theory, what basically the whole book is about, that state of feeling threatened has repercussions throughout everything related to our ability to be healthy, happy, think straight, and basically enjoy our lives. Did I do that right, Dad?
Very good, Seth.
Okay, good.
I would now simplify it and basically say that
now you
traumatic events retune our autonomic nervous system, retune our nervous system in general to be hypervigilant, to detect the potential of predator, which is what you were describing.
Yes.
And when we're talking about near death, whether it is a medical compromise, which it often comes from, or a hypoxic or swimming incident, the body has gone into sometimes literally a total shutting down, which means on some level it's given up its fight and flight and basically moved into this very precarious state, which is really preparatory to die, and almost a state of acceptance for some people. But the physiology underneath that is not a physiology of sociality. It's a physiology of processing threat. And if we define threat as threat of survival, then even the concept of welcoming to a near-death experience is still saying my body is giving up its drive for survival.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important, I think, things I hope people take away from this book, or people just take away from understanding the autonomic nervous system, or our bodies in general, is that we don't always respond to threats through fight or flight. We don't always respond to threats through activation and mobilization. Oftentimes, especially after very severe, perhaps near-death experience threats, our bodies shut down. And this is really, really important, because the way we treat people as a society, whether it's a legal system, a press, juries, just the peanut gallery in general, oftentimes is to assume that if somebody was actually in danger, they would have fought or fled. And so you see people who might have endured a horrific instance, but they shut down, they froze, there was no sign of a struggle. And oftentimes they are doubted, and oftentimes they begin to doubt themselves what the experience actually was. And I think it's really important that people understand that.
To continue on with the same theme is this whole concept of a retuned autonomic nervous system, and that prepares us to now live in a world. So if we've been experienced trauma, meaning our body has gone into this chronic state of threat detection, to optimize threat detection, then the world is threatening to us. Social events are threatening to us. Sounds are threatening to us.
The goalposts of what makes us feel safe has shifted. We respond and we're constantly reconditioned by the world around us. And if we have experienced danger, our body thinks the world is dangerous. And it's and this is really important also, because the body doesn't have unlimited resources. The reason the autonomic nervous system exists is because your body has to decide it's going to use finite resources to do something, whether it's to heal itself or whether that's to survive an immediate threat. It really can't do both at the same time. So if your body is always in the immediate threat or the shutdown state, it can't funnel resources towards the bodily functions that allow us to heal, grow, and restore. And that is a huge takeaway, I think, of polyvagal theory, of our book, I hope, is that when we feel safe, our bodies heal, grow, and restore. Better buffered against almost any physical or mental malady you can imagine, better able to think, better able to be creative, better able to be social, better able to live a good life.
The point that you're bringing up is that fight and flight is not a free option. It's a very costly one. It's metabolically costly,
Yes.
and the body can't maintain that. So even though it's a very effective strategy, it's very time limited. And what happens is when you deplete your resources, the body goes into this shutting down. And now what happens is that you're in from that physiological state, it starts to distort your perspective of the world. And you create a narrative of a world that is now there that can harm you.
Yeah. Now let's apply. We have these ancient, circuits in our nervous system and our brain that are designed to survive immediate short term, as you just said, danger. Now let's imagine a world in which you're in traffic for a couple hours a day, you're being yelled at by your boss, being monitored on spreadsheets. Maybe there's a lot of noise in your neighborhood. Let's just say that you are constantly overwhelmed, and you don't even have a minute of rest, relaxation, or anything like that. What's that going to do to you? Right? What does that do? That has real impacts on your body. That has real impacts on your health. It has real impacts on your ability to be the best you in almost every way.
Yeah. There's an interesting part of this whole story, and that is we're a very resilient species. So we can move from fight flight into a more social, safe state. That's not the problem. The problem is we didn't evolve with an easy mechanism to get out of shutting down responses. And so what you're talking about, the near death, is functionally a shutting down response. So that coming out of it is not like, oh, I'm back the person I was before. No, the body's been retuned. We're seeing this, of course, in long COVID. The body won the war. There's no longer a pathogen, but the body didn't get the message it won the war and now can celebrate. It still thinks something's going on. And in the world we live in a world of a matrix of threat cues. And so what you're talking about, Seth, about people always evaluating or the traffic issues, the nervous system reacts to threat cues with fight, flight, and mobilization. And what the industry wants is greater productivity. So if we'll threaten people, they'll work harder, they'll produce more. But the nervous system says, I can't maintain this level of output. And so it starts to protect itself and functionally is shutting down and almost going into a state of hibernation. But going out of it is not an easy neural pathway. It's not an easy journey. We didn't have the mechanisms built into our nervous system for that easy pathway.
Yeah, you were talking about the pandemic and sitting in traffic. And I remember somewhere in the book, you were talking about how the pandemic had changed people and how they no longer want to go back to work. So what is the impact there when you look at the polyvagal theory? What is that resistance that has been created to rejoin the office with fluorescent lightings and all those?
Well, I think you actually...
Yeah, you go, Dad. I got thoughts about this.
I think, no, okay. But I think you have the answer, Lottie. That is, their nervous system is retuned to be in a state of threat. And so now the office is too noisy for them. The light flickers. They feel and sense people standing behind them. They can't deal with the evaluation. Their body gets overwhelmed. And they're basically fatigued all the time. So the issue is, what can we be smarter about regulating our lives? Can we understand what our bodies need? And first and above all, can we literally listen to our body? And what that really is saying, can we infer what our body is telling us about its own autonomic state? And then most of us know what it's telling us. But what we have learned to do is just think that that voice of our body is optional. We don't have to listen to it. We have to listen to our boss, our professor, our parents. And it becomes a point in time where the body just gives up and says, you're not listening to me. I'm taking you out of this situation, and that's the only way you're going to survive.
And that might manifest as dissociation or some other kinds of things too. But I think, the post-pandemic office question, I think is a complex one, because I think there is depending on what your office environment is. Of course, it could be one that fosters creativity, teamwork, is a highly social environment. And I think a lot of people might miss that too. But then there's, of course, offices that are perhaps stressful just to get to. And then once you're there, there's even more stress. And you might just say, I can't subject myself to that again after seeing what it's like to step away from that. And so I think hopefully this is an opportunity for people to reevaluate how they treat employees, how they design offices. I think that one of the big takeaways of polyvagal theory is that making people feel safe matters. It matters in offices, it matters in schools, it matters in our homes, it matters in the world, almost every aspect of the world we live in. And if you care about the things that we as people should care about, then you should care about what it takes to make other people feel safe in the world around us.
Yeah, you also mentioned schools and the kids in school. So what happens to children that go to school? They don't feel safe. They might be bullied. There are other troublemakers in the class. How does polyvagal theory impact that?
Yeah, so polyvagal theory, again, at its core, is this idea that when we feel safe, our bodies and brains operate in a fundamentally different way than when we feel threatened. Now, if you're a young person in school who rarely or never feels safe, whether that's because of your home life, your school life, or something in the middle, good luck succeeding in school. Good luck, because your body is locked into a state of threat, very likely. The idea of sitting still in a classroom while somebody lectures you, come on, you're mobilized. You're going to be fidgety. You're going to be labeled all sorts of things. You're going to be a troublemaker, just like I was when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like good luck. And not only that, from the mobilization perspective, like not sitting still, the parts of our brain that are required to be creative, to be social, to be, either team players or teachers' pets, or all the things we sort of, value and reward in school. Well, your brain simply can't do that when it's in a state of threat. The parts of our brain that are required for both sociability and creativity require us to feel safe.
See, I would even say the ability to even be smart. We're not as smart as we really are because our bodies are in states of threat. We can't access certain areas of our brain because our body is really trying to take care of us. And there's literally a privilege to think, to daydream. And I know you have interest in spirituality, to become spiritual, not in a dissociative way, but in a creative, embodied way. You need to feel safe. And we're missing out on so many of the attributes of what it is to be a human. I think this is what is at the core of the book, that if our bodies are safe, who knows what we as a species will develop to become.
Yeah, you talk in the book about the green light, yellow light, red light zone. Can you just talk a little bit about the different lights? Because it's such a great analogy. It's like a stoplight. And in what zone, you already touched upon it, in what zone do we need to be in order to create healing for all the people out there?
Yeah, so we basically took the autonomic nervous system, which is this complex system that operates in our bodies, and we broke it down into a metaphor, which is a traffic light. The idea being that our autonomic nervous system, I'll never not have trouble pronouncing that word, our autonomic nervous system, it shifts, as I said, basically all of our bodily functions depending on how safe we feel. And it shifts them in pretty massive ways. And so we basically did is we broke down these shifts into three basic states: green, yellow, red, just like a traffic light. When you feel safe, green light. When you feel threatened, yellow light. When you feel so perhaps threatened that your body is in a state of shutdown, dissociation, fainting, any of those sorts of things, red light. And each of these systems associate with different bodily functions, different elements of the vagus nerve, and changes how our body operates. So when we say the green state or the green zone, we basically mean you feel safe and your body is able to operate systems of health, growth, and restorations, but also creativity, productivity, and sociability. When you feel threatened, well, that's fight or flight, right? That's activation, that's mobilization, that's threat detection. That's when your hearing changes. So you hear those predators. When you're in the red state, that's shutdown. That's what you're talking about, dissociation, perhaps fainting, all sorts of other responses that we associate with severe trauma and near-death experiences.
So going back to the issue of kids in school, a school refusal is a common feature among younger children. And that doesn't occur independent of what's going on in the autonomic nervous system. So are gut problems. So in the sense, the gut or stomach issue, which is very common in children, especially those who are having discomfort in school, is the body going into that red state. That dorsal vagus is what's creating the gut problems. It becomes a gut pain, it becomes constipation, it becomes diarrhea. It's basically saying that the gut is being dysregulated.
No, it's fascinating because polyvagal theory is everywhere. When you read this book, you start understanding how impacted we are. I mean, we're run by this nerve. Everything we do, going like all the way back to childhood. What was your school life like? And it's just fascinating. And even you talk about politics and the politicians and how they benefit by acting certain ways and keeping us in that state of fear. So it's absolutely fascinating. And can you talk a little bit about why the politicians and TV and media and everybody wants to keep us in a state of fear?
Yeah, well, I think that's
I'll let the journalists talk about that. Yeah.
So I am a journalist. Yeah, I'm a journalist here. It's two basic things. One is when we feel threatened, we are engaged with things. So if you're a television network or a social media company, you want people to stare at your screen, right? You want that level of engagement. It is, and oftentimes even the biometric tools that analytics companies might use, like the dials they hook up to people to measure engagement, something called galvanic skin response, GSR, which is a measure of sympathetic activity, which is a measure of being in the yellow state, of being threatened, is what it is. When we feel threatened, we are highly engaged. This is why this isn't always nefarious. You know, this is why we like horror movies, right? This is why suspense can be fun if you're watching a movie, but it can also be manipulated. And which brings us to the question about politicians, people in power. There's never been an authoritarian, strongman, dictator in human history who has not gotten there without casting some other group as a source of threat and fear. For example, is never in the course of human history. The path of the road of fascism and dictatorship is paved with fear. And it's for a very simple truth. When we feel threatened, we don't think critically. We don't. We stop asking questions. When we feel like our immediate survival is at stake, we just say, who can get me out of this jam as quickly as possible? And you don't ask any questions. This is a neurophysiological process that occurs. There is a reason that many people in politics, the media, power of all sorts, like to scare us. And it's because when you are scared, you don't have time to ask questions. You know, your body is just an immediate, this person's telling me there's a threat, they say they can get me out of that jam, I'm on kind of mode. And that's the truth.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
There's a switch that goes on. Once we get scared, it becomes about us. It's only when we feel safe in our bodies and in the place we are that we now exhibit benevolence, generosity, and compassion for others. Shouldn't say for everyone, but for most people, their ability to be compassionate and be benevolent is a function of how safe they feel. I should say it is a function of how safe they feel.
Absolutely.
Because even, there is Viktor Frankl wrote a very interesting book about his experiences in the concentration camps. And what that book taught me was that even in the worst of situations, there are some people who can feel safe enough in their own bodies that they can be compassionate and benevolent to others. And to me, that was a real challenge, from thinking of human behavior as basically being caused by external context versus free will. So the issue is, if we can monitor our own experience, our own bodily state, we have the option of being more mindful and being more benevolent and generous to others.
Yeah, I like to say that my dad just ruined thousands of years of philosophers' work. I mean, how many tomes have been written debating the nature of human nature? Are humans innately good? Are they selfish? Are they bad? What are we as people? And I think polyvagal theory honestly offers a really simple answer. When we feel safe, we are capable of benevolence, altruism, compassion, sociability. When we feel threatened, we have to be selfish, right? And I don't mean that as a form of judgment. You know, to be threatened means your survival's at stake. And when your survival's at stake, your body will do anything it can to survive, right? And I think selfishness comes from a place of threat, almost always.
No, it's quite fascinating because you think of children that grew up in a traumatic household, were never seen, never heard, always yelled at. And this is going on for years, this chronic trauma for their whole childhood. Then they grow up. How do they get themselves out of this jam? How do they, what can they do to heal that and not feel being in that state of threat?
The answer, of course, is with great difficulty to get out of it. But there's an optimistic part of polyvagal theory that says if we can find the portals that change your physiological state, then you have the opportunity to develop literally functionally neural exercises that allow you to experience and to expand your behavior. So the portal of treatment has always been cognitive. Tell people to behave better, they'll be better. Polyvagal theory says that's not a very effective or efficient portal, because we all know that when our foundational survival systems are triggered, we're not a very nice species. So the issue is, can we get those foundational survival states to be more calm? And so that's why music, modulated music like a mother's lullaby, can actually change the physiological state. And that's why I developed the intervention called the Safe and Sound Protocol, because it literally amplifies and mimics what a mother's voice would do to a baby, but you can now use it with adults. And now the body starts to basically open up and become accessible.
Yeah, I think, you know, what polyvagal theory tells us that feeling safe matters, and people who might experience trauma, particularly childhood trauma, the goalposts have shifted for what makes them feel safe, but they still can feel safe, right? I mean, think about, I come back to again and again dogs, right? There are, if you abuse a dog, that dog will be angry. If you are nice to a dog, for the most part, that dog will be nice, right? Oftentimes, I think people who grew up abused are basically like rescue dogs. They just need a little bit more love, right? In order to kind of come out the other side. And we need to be understanding about what causes people to feel safe. I think as a culture, we oftentimes very dismissive of other people's feelings. We make fun of people when they say things like trigger warning, right, in front of articles. We say to people, just get over their feelings. But understanding that these feelings come from a place, often a place of threat. And it's not just about getting over them, it's about acknowledging them and allowing people to get over them. That's the key, I think.
Yeah, the first step is acknowledgement and awareness. So when a person says, you know, I got triggered, that's not a bad thing to say. It's really an acknowledgement that they're not numb. Part of the adaptive function in life for many people with these trauma histories is being totally numb. And the issue is being aware that your body is responding to a situation is a first good start. And the other part is, can you now move that body into a broader range of physiological states through a journey of exploration and discovery of one's own feelings, without being threatened by your own body's feelings, because the bodily feelings are going to be locked with earlier associations of being abused and traumatized.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we could talk for hours, but I know we're going to have to end this podcast episode at some point. So I'm going to go to my last question. And that is, how is chronic pain and trauma related to polyvagal theory?
I'm going to start with
big
that.
question. That's a big question.
I'm going to start with that because about 2.5 years ago, when the pandemic just started, I was invited to be part of a think tank that was very interesting. They were physicians, primarily pain physicians and psychologists, who got interested in polyvagal theory. In fact, it was started by a person who was a spinal surgeon, and he discovered that spinal surgery didn't get rid of chronic pain, but group psychotherapy did, in a sense, creating sociality did. And then he, in a sense, discovered polyvagal theory. And so they brought me in and they wanted me to kind of like deconstruct and explain it. And initially I said, I know nothing about pain. And then something clicked and I realized that what pain is an unambiguous neuroception of threat, unambiguous. And it's chronic pain, not acute pain, that this is all about. And they're different processes. Acute pain is, in a sense, quote, real. There's injury, and you can deal with acute pain. The medications work, preparation and time works. But when acute pain turns into chronic pain, all bets are off, because there's now a rewiring through certain levels of learning and association where the body basically says, I'm under threat all the time. And so I started to learn that the actual structure of the polyvagal theory was helpful in understanding chronic pain. And then I started to realize that there are a lot of disorders that have chronic pain as a covariate or comorbidity to it. And I realized that a lot of them are basically situations in which the body has healed, but the nervous system didn't get the message that they were healed. It's kind of this real peculiar bit. You start finding out that people who have certain propensities for certain types of disorders, those disorders of pain and chronic pain, one is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. The symptoms, it's genetic, but the actual symptoms of that tend to be associated with a traumatic event followed by a dysfunctioning of the autonomic nervous system, and then the symptoms become prevalent and unmanageable. And we're seeing things like that with long COVID, where the person beats the pathogen, but the nervous system still is treating the body as if it's under constant threat. So the message has to get to the body through signals of safety. And that's part of where my research is bringing me, that we need to bring these signals, and they're literally signals to the nervous system to say everything is okay. And that's why vagal nerve stimulation is becoming very popular as a go-to for some of these chronic disorders, because it's sending signals to the brainstem. Everything's okay in the body. And my comment about that is you don't need a vagal nerve stimulator, because sociality is a very efficient and powerful vagal nerve stimulator.
Yeah, just, we joke about how much, social media and TikTok talks about like hacks and tricks for stimulating your vagus, and that's all well and good. And perhaps some of them work. But the most efficient, most effective, most natural, most everything way of stimulating your vagus nerve is to simply have safe social interactions with people who you like. It's really that simple. There's a reason we as humans are drawn to social settings. There's a reason we like parties. There's a reason we like dinner with friends. There's a reason we like hanging out with dogs. There's a reason we like all of these things. And it is triggering our vagus nerve in a positive and healing way to be in such situations.
I love it. That was so great. It was like a perfect wrap up of the whole episode. We just need to have more face-to-face and lovely interactions.
I mean, how heartwarming is that? To realize, like, what's the big takeaway? Spend more time with people you like, right? It's like a Hallmark movie, like it's great.
Your next movie.
I think it's great, but it's also, I mean, like these are things that I think society views sometimes as frivolous. We view social interactions and parties as frivolous or wasteful. And I think it's important to say this stuff matters. Spending time with friends matter. And I think polyvagal theory gives you permission to do these things we are naturally drawn to because our bodies rely on them to heal, is the truth.
That's just great. And did you have any wrap up sentences to add to that, Stephen?
Well, I just would say, isn't it wonderful to have a son like Seth? That's what I would say.
Isn't it wonderful to have a father like Steve? Dr. Porges, Dad.
Yeah.
Love it.
See, that's fine for tonight. The only comment I make on all that is that if we start to see our social behavior as neural exercises, we now, in a sense, start understanding the benefits. It becomes not optional, it's obligatory. And we want, rather than, in a sense, forcing children to sit in classrooms, the social aspect of play is important for them to develop the neural resilience to be able to sit in a classroom. It's such a paradox.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
the most important thing you learn in school probably isn't trigonometry, right? It's like it probably is how to be around other people, how to work together, how to
Yeah.
cooperate, how to be a decent social person. And we need to value those things. We need to literalize the value of those, I think, because it is so important.
Yeah, it's not the actual academics. It's more
And
about our
no problems
social.
with that. I mean, he's a Dr. Porges, he's an academic, right? You
Right.
know, no,
Well,
Right.
I want to close with a true story. My high school gave me an award this past year. They elected me to their wall or hall of honor. And so I had to do a talk to their high school assembly, but I did it virtually. And everyone else who gave their talk about the great education they had and all the advanced placement courses. And I basically, on my talk, said that's all irrelevant. The only thing important is the friendships that you make, and they'll last you a lifetime. They're important. In a sense, the co-regulation. So I still have friends from high school. The answer is don't get misled by saying it's the grades you get on your GREs or your SATs that are the most important. The most important bit is really the moments of shared safety. I'm going to use the word shared moments of intimacy, but it doesn't mean that they're sexual. It means that you're safe in the presence of another, that you don't need any defensive systems. And we crave that ability to feel safe enough to be in the arms of another. And even so, the question of people who come from these really adverse homes where there's such abuse, and they feel so unsafe in creating relationships with others, in their mind, their dream state is to be safe in the arms of another, but their body won't let them, in a sense, feel calm enough to be embraced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just such good advice for people. And I can't say enough good things about this book. So everybody go and see if you can find this book. Is it available on Amazon and all the different platforms, bookstores?
Yeah. It comes out September 26th from W.W. Norton. Our Polyvagal World, How Safety and Trauma Change Us by Dr. Stephen W. Porges and also his son, Seth Porges.
Wonderful. So we'll put the link in the podcast notes as well, so they can go straight to Amazon. But it's a great book. Like I said in the beginning, you don't have to have any medical knowledge, and it gives you such great insight to your everyday life and your own reactions to what you have experienced in your life and how, what to do about that. So I want to thank you both for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast today, and hopefully I'll have you back again in the future.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you very much for having us here. Thank you.